What's up everybody, Hoang Zero here, and today we are going to cover the first deck profile for the EX3 format, Examon. Examon is a raid boss style of deck that puts down this huge body that your opponent is going to struggle dealing with just because it's immune to various forms of removal. It forces your opponent to do combat with it, and it also can output a ton of damage itself. This deck is super fun, and it's very much so just a blue-green version of Demon if you think about it in a certain way. Not only that, this is the last Royal Knight we've been missing, so now we have all the Royal Knights in the Digimon TCG. So, without further ado, we're about to get started. But right before we get started, real quick word from our sponsor. Have you ever wanted to own a Hoang Zero / Lumchop playmat thumbnail design? Well, I have some really great news for you. What you can go ahead and do is you can go to Lumchop's website for only €10. You can purchase a digital copy, and then you can go to your favorite playmat printing website and go get it made IRL. Let's go! Woo! Alright, so jumping into the deck profile, the main thing about Examon you're going to want to think about when you're constructing this deck is consistency. When you get to Examon as early as turn 2 or turn 3 potentially, you more or less seal the game. It's very difficult for your opponent to beat you at that point. And so you want to ensure you have the tools necessary to get to that point in the game. You want to ensure that you're finding your Examon pieces. If you don't evo into Examon, then you're generally not going to have a great time. So this build is focused a lot on trying to maximize that consistency to get to your top end. So our Digitamas, we only play 4 because everything else kind of feels mid and or bad. Baby Domon. This Baby Domon gives you plus 1000 DP whenever your Digimon is unsuspended. This egg is really powerful because in combination with the Slayer Drumon or with the Examon, you're going to get that plus 1000 DP, and it works during both players' turns. So for example, Slayer Drumon can hit 13k on your turn or 13k on your opponent's turn. Vice versa, Examon can hit 16k on either player's turns. That allows you to escape a lot of different thresholds or match or block a lot of attack bodies that are going to swing into you. Going into our rookie lineup, we do play the 3 Madoki Betamon. So the main thing in this deck is a lot of your Digimon say costs 3 to evo unless you evo over Dracomon, in which case it costs 2. And your ultimates are cost 4 to evo unless it's over Dramon, in which case it only costs 3. So Madoki Betamon being neither a Draco nor Dramon means that you're going to be paying the full cost for your evolution to 4. Specifically not being named Dracomon. So because of that, it feels really bad to evolve into this card, so we don't necessarily have to maximize on it. The Madoki Betamon is really important for A, stopping memory boost, and B, it's really great into decks like the Bloom Hydra. Bloom Hydra wants to gain a lot of memory off of their Bloom or Hydra. And so you could run Siakomon to deny their Digisorption. However, we ran the math, and overall, blocking the memory from Bloom Hydra is much more efficient than blocking the reduction off of the Blossomon or such, because then there are cards like Agitarmon and Green Memory Boost that you're also going to be denying with the Madoki Betamon. Next, we play 4 of the starter deck Dracomon. The big function of this card is the fact that it is a Dracomon, so it's going to be a really important target to evolve over. And then it also can grab pieces. The pieces that it grabs, it can't grab Examon, which does kind of suck, but it does grab a majority of the rest of the deck, so it's fine, I guess. And then we do have new EX3 Dracomon. This one evolves over 0 over Baby Domon. And this one will grab your pieces. It grabs almost every single card in this deck, minus the Madoki Betamon and any other various decks. And it also grabs the Examon. And when your Digimon would suspend, you do gain plus 1000 DP. So in combination with the Slayer Drumon or the Examon, you can hit 14k or 17k, both of which are fantastic numbers to break through. This Dracomon is very good. It's also blue and green, so you can do some really cool things. For example, you grab it with the Davis and such. You can also use it as a green component to cast options like Megadeth. Going into our level 4 lineups, the Dramons are pretty interesting because they share a lot of resemblance with the level 5 counterparts, but the important thing to note is that we do run one of the Dramons that we do run. It doesn't actually care about what it evolves over, so if you do evolve into Madoki Betamon, do note you can evolve into that Dramon. We'll talk about that in a second. But starting us off, we do run 3 of the Evade Dramon. This Dramon is Evo for 2 over Dracomon, so it's 3 over Madoki. It has Evade on main body, it has Evade all players' turn, inheritable. So why the Evade is super important is One of the biggest reasons is Evade works in combat. So if your Digimon were to be destroyed in combat, what you could do is you could tap the Digimon and then avoid the destruction completely. This becomes really relevant against decks such as Jesmon or decks such as Grandis Kuwagamon, where they're going to be looking to delete your Digimon. And so using the evade mechanic, you have a lot of leeway to try and avoid that. So for example, if you were to block out your opponent, and let's say you hypothetically were to, not even block out, but let's say Jesmon goes in the X antibody and they swing into you, what you can do is then you can tap the Digimon with the evade, and then because they didn't destroy the body, that does mean they don't even get off the piercing, so you're in a really great position. And in combination with Examon and Dramon, it gets even stronger because those Digimon will unsuspend when suspended. So you can do some really great color combination combos. We do play 4 of the Security Core Dramon, so this card is the 4 of for the level 4s. One, because it's Security Bomb. If you do hit this Core Dramon in your security, generally speaking, you're just going to blow your opponent out of the water. It's also an extra consistency piece, so early games, if you're not seeing the cards, then you're going to be able to get a little bit of extra draw power. And like I said, you can evolve this over the Madoki Betamon to have a little bit more consistency. But the primary function is to maximize on the chance you hit this into security. If you hit this in security, you can set up a super easy Joggers play to go into the Examon. And then we play 3 blocker Cordra. This Cordramon is blocker main, blocker inherent. And one of the really cool things is that, yes, you give stack blocker that it's underneath, but also Examon has the ability, spoiler alert, to call out a body for free. So you can call out this Cordramon to act as an additional blocker, so you can have Exa blocker plus Cordra blocker. Going into our level 5s, you just play 4 of both of the level 5s from EX3. Wingdramon does have evade as well as the Jogress ability. And then Grounddramon has blocker as well as the Jogress ability. Both are end of turn. So what you're going to end up doing most games is you are going to evolve into one of the 5s and then slam the other 5, and this will Jogress into Examon. You do have to play 4 of each. There's really no other option. You value the end of turn Jogress way too much. So Wingdramon being evade does mean you can call it out off the Examon skill and have that extra evade, which means your bodies are going to be stickier in general, whereas if you call out Grounddramon, it's an additional blocker that you can use to stave off your opponent's aggression. Going into our level 6s, you are going to note that we do run the 4 Dramon. So if you don't happen to see your Examon, what you end up having to do is you do have to play off of the Dramon. Between Dramon and Breakdramon, Dramon is the much better level 6 to play off of because it has double swing as well as evade built in. So, for example, you can swing, restand, and then pass your turn doing something, and then if you have blocker inherent, then you can double block on your opponent's turn because Dramon will unsuspend. Dramon also has the ability to force your opponent into combat. Right? So what I mean by that is at the start of your opponent's main phase, what you can do is by tapping one of your Digimon with Drumon in its name, you will be able to, I can't see the card description exactly. It might be able to just tap more than just Drumon, but I know at least Drumon. By tapping one of your Digimon, your opponent has to declare it has to declare an attack with one of their Digimon. So this is really potent because, for example, if they pull out a stack and raising like Akuamon X, for example, Dramon forces them to immediately attack, and if you have blocker inherent or just a blocker on the board, you can just block that Akua X and you immediately get rid of their stack. So that force attack is very, very powerful at disrupting your opponent's hiding raising strategies. And then ESS, it is that same effect, so it will give the force combat ability to Examon. And then Breakdramon is when this Digimon is suspended, tap one of your opponent's Digimon as well. When an opponent's Digimon is destroyed, burn the top of your opponent's security, and then its ESS is burn the top of your opponent's security when a Digimon is destroyed. So a lot of people are going to play the Breakdramon at 3 or 4. Me and my mod chat collectively have put in over 100 plus games of this deck in. And the one thing we've noticed is that Breakdramon, he can be a little clunky at times, right? The burn is really nice, especially into matchups like Security Control or Madoki Betamon. But more often than not, he does end up feeling like a dud. So rather than running 3 or 4 Breakdramons, we'd rather invest those slots into more consistency pieces, like the Blue Memory Boost, or having techs that let us beat more difficult matchups, like the Forbidden Trident we'll talk about in a bit. You can run 3 Breakdramon, I personally wouldn't, and that's specifically because Breakdramon is a really nice standalone as well as an extra consistency piece, but personally I think 2 Breakdramon is more than enough. With Grounddramon you have 6 total green targets that you can use to Joggers off of, and like I said, Slayerdramon can also win the game by himself at times. And then finally, we are on 4 Examon. I think anyone running less than 4 Examon is going to sorely miss it, because sometimes, like I said, if you don't find Examon, the game gets exponentially harder. Running 4 Examon just makes sure, like, it increases the odds that you do have the ability to Joggers into it. And so you may ask, like, oh, what happens if you already have Examon on the board, and now you have all these other extra Examons in your hand? Well, the great part is that Examon, first of all, is when you were to Joggers into it, you can take one of your Drumons and put it underneath, and then if you Joggers into it, you can special summon or summon from hand a Drumon Digimon. So for example, you can summon an additional Slayerdramon or an additional Breakdramon or Grounddramon or Wingdramon, etc. And then on the following turn, you can Joggers again if they have not cleared out the second body. It's a super easy setup for Joggers, and that's why we do have the multiple Examons, is because we can set up several Examons. So for example, if your opponent gets rid of the first Examon, you still have that extra body, so you can maybe make a second Examon. So Examon, for example, call out Slayerdramon, Examon gets Chaos Degraded, and then you can swing Slayerdramon twice, slam Grounddramon, Joggers, and then wow, you were fantastic. And then you play 1 Death Examon. Oh wait, I also forgot to mention, with the Examon, when this Digimon is suspended, untap this Digimon, suspend one of your opponent's Digimon. Really fantastic overall. This has such huge synergy with Slayerdramon, as well as blocking, evade, etc. It's just an insane boss card. And now, moving on to Death Examon. So the weakness of this deck, or one of the weaknesses, is dealing with wide boards. So Slayerdramon plus Examon, if they both have the Slayerdramon effect, it does not stack. So your opponent can declare the same target to do the effect, so they would fundamentally only attack with 1 target. And that can be really problemsome, because what will happen is they'll just use the rookie to attack. And so this is why we run cards that are very effective against wide. Death Examon is very excellent at punishing your opponents if they try to play around your Examon. If they try to go super wide to play around the Slayerdramon effect, you Death X them, and then they're put into a really awkward situation. And then going into our options, we do play the 2 Forbidden Tridents. Forbidden Trident is great in the mirror, because it makes it so your Examon will hit 19k, so you can break over their Examon. And then B, Forbidden Trident allows you to bounce back a level 3 when attacking, and it's not once per turn. So Examon double swing, bounce back level 3, and then you can use the Slayerdramon effect to force combat. Or, for example, you can do Forbidden Trident, Slayerdramon double swing, and then Joggers into Examon. And then you have a lot of different ways that you can go about it. But the gist is Death Examon plus Forbidden Trident are in the deck specifically to deal with your opponent trying to go wide to play around the Examon setup. We play 1 Ice Wall. Ice Wall is actually broken in this deck, like unironically stupid broken in this deck, because Examon or Slayerdramon force combat, and then Ice Wall will take away 2 of your opponent's memory, and then if you choke your opponent to 1 and you Ice Walled, you legit just steal their turn. Like it's just gone. It's just straight up gone. Or at the very least, you can just minimize how much memory your opponent actually has to play with. Ice Wall is just disgusting in this deck. It can also just buy time for you if you need to find your pieces. We do play 2 Memory Boost. Memory Boost, so you look at it and you're like, oh, but you run like green Digimon, like maybe you'll bot deck the green Digimon you need. But realistically speaking, looking at it from a math standpoint, you run primarily blue targets. You run enough blue targets to justify the blue Memory Boost, and the additional memory is going to be very helpful when you're hard slamming your level 5s to look for a Joggers play. And like I said, consistency is king. You want to run additional consistency pieces to find your Examon and such. So Blue Memory Boost does a really fantastic job of this. And then we play 1 Megadeth. Megadeth is really easy to cast because you have so many blue-green components. this card can sometimes sack your opponent in security if they do try and just push all in. So like against Madoki Betamon, for example, you can just blow them out. If your opponent does Digivolve into a card like Venusmon, for example, you can just Mega Death away the Venusmon, and then they have to deal with the Examon on the following turn, and that's very powerful. And then we play 4 Davis. Davis is not only a memory tamer, so the 3 memory is very appreciated because then you can put your opponent to 4 after you hard slam a level 5. But he grabs both blue and green on the play. If it hasn't been obvious at this point, you play both blue and green components. So you generally speaking do grab you +2 on the component part, and that feels really fantastic. And it's really important that you do get those pieces. Davis also potentially compensates for the low rookie ratio, as well as the lower than average champion ratio, and mega ratio as well. So Davis in general is just a godsend in this deck. And yeah, that's basically the deck profile. There are a lot of other techs that you can potentially entertain. One of those techs is going to be the red plugin. Red plugin, yes, is a red card, but if you have a tamer on board, you can cast it regardless of color requirements. And casting it on Drumon or Examon means you can inflict upwards of 4 damage in a single turn. That can take your opponent off guard if they're not expecting it. It also gives you a lot of pushing power if your opponent is playing a more control-heavy deck, or even if you're into the mirror, for example. So red plugin is something that should be on the radar for anyone being aware of Examon. You can play Giga Death. Giga Death is very excellent into Bloomlord. Bloomlord is going to look to go wide, and it's going to feel really bad. Hydramon's going to bot take your stuff, etc. Giga Death can just send their entire board to the bottom of their deck. And yeah, it's really hard for them to stabilize after that, because ideally you're going to have your Dramon or your Examon to play off of afterward. And then another tech that you could look into is the green plugin. Green plugin is very interesting because green plugin says draw 1, and first of all, actually, before we get to that, it's a green card, and you run enough green components where you can actually cast green plugin often enough without a tamer setup, which is A1, and then draw 1. And Digivolve into a Digimon that costs 3 or less. So you look at a lot of your Digimon and you're like, oh, Wing Dramon costs 4, Dramon costs 4, etc. But then you remember their special Digivolution box says Evo for 3. And because of that, what you actually end up doing is you can use the plugin and then evolve into those cards because of their special Digivolution requirement. So it actually turns cards like Dramon, cards like the Breakdramon into a 2-cost evolution, which if you're being choked from memory or you just want to choke your opponent and be efficient, it's really, really good. And then last but not least, the last card that you could potentially look to tech in is Samadhi Santi. Samadhi is really interesting because you can tap your Digimon and then untap it if it's like Dramon or Examon, for example, and then you can stun out one of your opponent's cards. For example, in the mirror matchup, if you can stun out your opponent's Examon, they really can't do anything at that point. You can also stun out a tamer like Kiriha because Blue Flare is one of your harder matchups. And yeah, it's just a really nifty tech that you can look into. So now we'll get into the combos. We'll show a couple of lines of play that you can do as the Examon player. Alright, so going into the combo lines, we're going to showcase some of the really basic combos you're going to need to know for your Examon deck. And the bread and butter combo that you're going to do is jogressing into Examon itself. So ideally, you're going to have your level 5 in raising. You're going to move out onto your turn, and then you are going to look to hard slam your other level 5 generally, because that's going to be the cheapest. And by doing so, you're going to pass your opponent over to 4, and then end of turn, you're going to jogress into your Examon. In an ideal situation, you're going to have the level 6s in your hand. You slam or place the Breakdramon underneath the Examon to get the Breakdramon's inheritable, which burns your opponent's top of security, and then they play the Dramon off the effect because you were jogressing. When it comes to your opponent's turn, now if they decide to pull out a raising, what you can go ahead and do is with the Dramon effect, you can tap Dramon out to force your opponent to swing into combat. So your opponent's going to swing a Akuamon here, for example. Dramon will untap itself because of its effect, and then Examon will be able to block the Akuamon. Examon will also untap itself, and then Akuamon will be destroyed. And this is why Examon is so powerful against stack-heavy decks like Grandis Kuwagamon, because they can never pull out safely without getting their stack removed. Okay, so the next combo we're going to go over is what to do if your opponent decides to flood their board with rookies to try and deny the Exes Slayer Drumon combo, or in general if your opponent plays bothersome rookies like Pomumon that would prevent you from summoning by effects. What we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to pull our Slayer Drumon stack from the raising area out. And with our 1 memory, we're going to go ahead and cast Forbidden Trident, the spicy tech. This will give our Slayer Drumon additional DP, as well as the ability to bounce back level 3s on swing. Slayer Drumon is going ahead and swing into the security. It will restand, as well as bounce back one of these level 3s. And then we'll go ahead and check. It's a Mimi, that's totally fine. And then Slayer Drumon is going ahead and swing a second time. This will bounce back the last Pomumon. And then that last security check, it really doesn't matter at this point, as long as the Slayer Dramon doesn't die, a Coolmon, that's fine. And then what we can do is finish it off, Hard Slam Ground Dramon. This will allow us to now end of turn Jog Rest thanks to Ground Dramon's effect. We go into Examon, and then Examon ability is going to shove one of the pieces from underneath. So we're going to go ahead and shove under Breakdramon because it gives us the burn. And then we can go ahead and play a card like Blocker Core Dramon. And now our opponent, if they decide to pull out of Raising, they will immediately get hit by the Examon. So fundamentally, your opponent cannot actually move out of Raising this turn. They have to waste an upturn to build up. And so even though you patched your opponent's 7 memory, you're still in a really fantastic position because what are they doing to Examon? If they have some form of removal for it, that's totally fine. Generally speaking, you would usually have as level 6 to accompany the Examon, and if that was the case, then you could immediately build into another Examon afterward. Alright, so that is everything for the Examon deck profile. Hopefully this deck does all of you well if you decide to play it. It's a really fun deck. It's very much so a defensive raid boss style of deck, which is not something we've previously had in Digimon. It's a ton of fun. I think this deck will... I don't think it's too expensive at the moment. I think you can pre-sale price Examon is only like $20, so it can only go lower, hopefully. Or, you know, who knows. But either way, hopefully, if you do get the chance to play this deck, you do enjoy it. Thank you to Tessero for helping me do this little setup. I've been asking for 2 days straight now. Nobody helped me except for Tessero, thank God. But yeah, so thank you all very much, and take it easy.